It was a night like any other, or so I thought. I arrived home late, the kind of late that had become so routine that I no longer even apologized for it. My job as a construction foreman demanded long hours, and with the current project nearing its deadline, the days had stretched into weeks of exhaustion. As I turned my key in the lock, I expected the usual scene. A quiet house with the faint hum of the television in the living room, Svetlana in her usual sweatpants and hoodie, and maybe the faint aroma of the dinner she'd made for herself hours earlier. Instead, I was greeted by something completely unexpected. Svetlana stood in the hallway, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the living room lamp. But tonight, she wasn't the relaxed, casual woman I was used to coming home to. She was dressed in a sleek, dark blue dress that hugged her figure in a way that seemed almost foreign. Her hair, usually pulled back into a loose ponytail or bun, cascaded over her shoulders in perfectly styled waves. Her makeup was light but deliberate, her lips a subtle shade of pink. And the scent, a perfume I didn't recognize, hung in the air, soft and alluring. I stopped mid-step, the contrast so stark it felt as if I'd walked into someone else's home. "What's the occasion?" I asked, keeping my tone casual but unable to suppress the flicker of curiosity that must have shown on my face. My eyes involuntarily took in the entire scene. The dress, the hair, the faint smirk on her lips that was just enough to seem almost rehearsed. Svetlana shrugged, her smile widening. "Nothing special. I just thought it was time to do something different. You always say I should treat myself more, so I did." There was a lightness to her voice, an almost playful edge, but it didn't sit right. I couldn't put my finger on why, but it felt calculated. "Well, you look great," I said, still standing awkwardly by the door. "Thanks," she replied smoothly before retreating into the kitchen. "Dinner's in the fridge if you're hungry." I hesitated, unsure if I should press her further. But what was I supposed to say? "Why are you suddenly dressed like you're going out to a cocktail party?" Instead, I brushed off the nagging feeling in the back of my mind and chalked it up to her needing a change from the monotony of our routine. But that feeling lingered. As I ate alone, picking at the leftovers she had prepared, I replayed the moment over and over. The dress, the hair, the perfume, it all felt so out of place. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her about it. Not without evidence. Not without a real reason. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself watching her more closely than I usually did. She slipped into bed next to me, her movements careful and quiet. Her face was peaceful, her breathing even, but my thoughts were anything but calm. For the first time in years, I felt as though I didn't fully know the person lying beside me. The next morning began like any other. The alarm buzzed at 6 a.m., its shrill tone breaking through the stillness of the house. I rolled over and shut it off, careful not to disturb Svetlana, who was still sound asleep. Her face was serene, her hair a tousled contrast to the polished look from the night before. I got dressed quietly and headed to the construction site, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. Maybe I was overthinking it. People were allowed to change, to try new things. Maybe she had dressed up for herself, or maybe it was just a whim. That's what I told myself as I drove to work, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the road almost lulling me into a false sense of normalcy. But then, on my way home for a quick lunch break, something caught my attention. Parked near our house was an old, beat-up Toyota Camry. Its paint was chipped and faded, its windows slightly fogged from the chill in the air. At first, I assumed it belonged to a neighbor, maybe a visitor. But as I parked in the driveway, I noticed something strange. The man sitting in the driver's seat seemed out of place. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and when he saw me looking, he quickly turned his head, pretending to busy himself with something on the dashboard. My instincts flared, but I brushed it off. People parked on the street all the time. It wasn't that unusual, was it? By the time I returned to work, the image of that car and its driver lingered in my mind, like an itch I couldn't quite reach. And when I came home that evening, I couldn't help but glance out the window more than usual, half expecting to see the Camry still parked there. It wasn't. That night, Svetlana seemed her usual self. She chatted about her day, laughing at her own jokes as we ate dinner. Her demeanor was light, casual, and convincing enough to make me feel silly for my earlier paranoia. But just as I started to relax, something small, something almost insignificant, grabbed my attention. As I was tidying up the kitchen, a crumpled receipt caught my eye. It had been carelessly left on the counter, half buried under a stack of junk mail. I picked it up, smoothing out the creases, and froze. The receipt was from a restaurant, one we had visited only a handful of times for special occasions. Riverside. The date was just 2 days ago. The total? $112. A hefty amount for a lunch meeting, especially considering the time stamp read 1:15 p.m. Svetlana had mentioned a work lunch that day. She'd been so casual about it, saying it was just a meeting with a client. But something about that receipt didn't sit right with me. Her company wasn't the type to splurge on expensive meals. They were known for pinching every penny. And $112 wasn't exactly the kind of lunch you'd have with a client, at least not in her line of work. That evening, as we sat in the living room, I decided to bring it up. I didn't want to sound accusatory, but my curiosity had reached its limit. "How was your meeting with the client the other day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, it went well. Nothing too exciting, just the usual stuff," she said, her voice calm and composed. For a moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the receipt, the exact total still burned into my memory. I didn't press further. Not yet. I needed more than a hunch to go on. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. I had to stop ignoring the signs. The change in her appearance, the mysterious car, the receipt, all of it painted a picture I didn't want to see. It wasn't enough to suspect something. I needed proof. Whatever was happening, I couldn't let it slip past me. And so, I made a decision. I would watch. I would wait. And when the time was right, I would uncover the truth. The next day, I woke up with a sense of determination. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions or let emotions cloud my judgment. If something was happening, I needed to approach it with a clear head and a sharp focus. Scenes and accusations wouldn't get me anywhere. I got up earlier than usual, slipping out of bed quietly to avoid waking Svetlana. The house was still, the kind of silence that feels heavier when your mind is racing. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the crumpled receipt from Riverside that I'd fished out of the trash the night before. The date and time stared back at me like a challenge. Svetlana eventually joined me in the kitchen, humming softly as she moved about, preparing her morning tea. She looked radiant, her demeanor light and cheerful as if nothing was amiss. "Good morning," she said, flashing me a bright smile. "Morning," I replied, doing my best to match her tone. "You're in a good mood today." She laughed lightly, waving a hand. "I guess I'm just feeling good. It's Friday after all." I nodded, pretending to sip my coffee, but I was studying her closely. Every movement, every word, every glance. There was an effortlessness to her actions that felt rehearsed. As she left for work, kissing me on the cheek on her way out the door, I couldn't help but notice her perfume again. The same alluring scent from a few nights ago. It lingered in the air long after she was gone, a reminder of the questions I still didn't have answers to. Later that day, I left the construction site during lunch to run a quick errand. I decided to visit Riverside myself, driven by a need to piece together what exactly had happened there. The restaurant was a cozy, upscale spot overlooking the river, intimate and perfect for couples or private meetings. I walked in under the pretense of ordering a coffee to go, taking my time to glance around the room. The bartender greeted me with a polite smile. "What can I get you?" "Just a coffee, thanks," I said. Then, as casually as I could, I pulled out the receipt. "Hey, I was wondering if you could help me out. My wife had lunch here a couple of days ago and raved about it. Do you remember this table?" He squinted at the receipt, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Yeah, I think so," he said after a moment. "That was one of the corner tables by the window. A man and a woman sat there. Stayed for quite a while, if I remember right." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. A man and a woman. Svetlana hadn't mentioned anyone else being there. She'd framed it as a simple work meeting, just her and a client. "Thanks," I murmured, taking my coffee and leaving the restaurant. My mind was racing as I walked back to my car. This was no longer just a hunch. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. When I got home that evening, Svetlana was already there, curled up on the couch with her phone in hand. She looked up as I walked in, smiling warmly. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice light and casual. Same old, I replied, forcing a smile. I sat down across from her, watching as she tapped away on her phone. The device buzzed occasionally, but every time it did, she flipped it over so the screen faced down. I didn't say anything, but I made a mental note of it. This wasn't the first time I'd noticed her doing that. Over dinner, I decided to test the waters. "By the way, did I tell you I stopped by Riverside today? Wanted to check it out since you said it was so nice." Her fork paused mid-air for the briefest of moments before she recovered, laughing lightly. "Oh, really? Did you like it?" "It's a beautiful place," I said, my tone neutral. "Must have been nice having lunch there the other day." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "It was. The client loved it." I didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, I let the conversation drift to other topics, all the while filing away her every word, every gesture. That night, as she slept beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of uncovering something big. The receipt, the man at the restaurant, the way she flipped her phone screen down, these weren't isolated incidents. They were breadcrumbs, leading me to a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore it anymore. By the next morning, I knew observation alone wasn't going to cut it anymore. If I wanted answers, I'd have to dig deeper. Svetlana was good at maintaining her composure, but even the most careful person leaves a trail. I started with her phone. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I'd always respected her privacy, but the inconsistencies in her behavior left me no choice. While she was in the shower, I carefully picked up her phone from the nightstand. The lock screen lit up, but it was password protected. Of course. She had recently changed her PIN, claiming it was for security reasons, but now I wasn't so sure. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it, frustrated but more determined than ever. Instead, I decided to focus on something I could control, her routine. Svetlana wasn't unpredictable. She followed patterns. If there was something to uncover, I needed to be strategic about where and when I looked. That evening, I casually asked about her plans for the weekend. She didn't hesitate. "Just a little work event on Saturday," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's nothing formal, just something with the team." "Where is it?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Some rented space downtown. I don't remember the address. Annie's organizing it." Annie. Her closest friend and confidant. The one person who might know more than she was letting on. "Sounds nice," I said, feigning disinterest. but my mind was already working. I knew where Annie worked, and it wouldn't take much effort to check if this so-called event was legitimate. The next day, during my lunch break, I decided to take a detour. Annie's office wasn't far, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to stop by. I waited in the lobby, pretending to browse through emails on my phone, until she appeared. Annie looked startled to see me, her expression quickly shifting into a forced smile. "Andrew! What a surprise! What brings you here?" "Just wanted to check in," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Svetlana mentioned a work event this weekend. I thought you might have some details about it." For a moment, she hesitated, her eyes darting to the side. Then she laughed nervously. "Oh, right. The work thing. It's more of a casual gathering, really. Nothing too exciting." Her words felt rehearsed, and the slight waver in her voice didn't escape me. I nodded, playing along, but the encounter only fueled my suspicions. That evening, I set a plan in motion. While Svetlana was in the shower, I searched her belongings for any clues. It didn't take long to find something. Tucked into the side pocket of her purse was a small velvet box. My stomach dropped as I opened it to reveal a pair of gold cufflinks. They were engraved with the initials AK, initials that didn't belong to me. I closed the box quickly, my heart racing. Who was AK? And why would Svetlana have his cufflinks? When she came out of the bathroom, I acted as though nothing had happened. But inside, my mind was spinning. The cufflinks, the restaurant receipt, the mysterious car, it all pointed to something bigger than I had imagined. I decided to take things a step further. That night, while she was asleep, I carefully retrieved her phone again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint smudge pattern on the screen, as though she'd been using a specific part of the keypad frequently. Using this clue, I tried a few combinations, focusing on numbers she might use. After a few failed attempts, the screen unlocked. I was in. I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounding with every swipe. Most of the conversation seemed innocent enough, but one thread stood out. It was with someone saved as Annie, but the tone was off. The messages were brief, coded almost, and ended with phrases like, "See you soon," or "Same time as usual." It didn't take long to realize that this wasn't Annie. Whoever this was, Svetlana had gone to great lengths to hide their identity. I screenshotted the messages and sent them to my own phone before carefully locking hers again. By the time I crawled back into bed, I felt a mixture of anger and dread. Svetlana was hiding something. That much was clear. But this wasn't just about finding out the truth anymore. It was about understanding how far she'd gone to keep it from me. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow. The weight of what I had discovered the night before settled in my chest like a heavy stone. But there was no room for despair. If Svetlana was hiding something, I needed to know the full extent of it. No half-truths, no assumptions, only facts. I spent the morning at the construction site, going through the motions of work, but my mind was elsewhere. The cufflinks, the messages, the receipt, they played on a loop in my head, each detail sharpening my resolve. By lunchtime, I had made a decision. It was time to bring in help. I couldn't do this alone, and I needed someone who could gather the evidence without tipping Svetlana off. After a quick search online, I found a local private investigator who specialized in cases like this. His name was Victor, and his reviews were glowing. People praised his discretion, his thoroughness, and his ability to uncover the truth without leaving a trace. I called him and explained my situation in broad strokes. "I need to know what's going on," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Victor listened patiently before replying. "I'll take the case, but I'll need as much information as you can provide. Names, places, dates, anything that might help." I agreed to meet him that evening at his office. When I got home later that day, Svetlana was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. She greeted me with a smile, the same effortless charm that had once felt so genuine. Now, it felt like a mask. "How was work?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Busy, as always," I replied, forcing a smile. "You?" "Nothing exciting," she said lightly, turning back to the stove. "Just the usual grind." I nodded, watching her carefully. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, her demeanor calm and composed. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. After dinner, I made an excuse to step out, telling her I needed to check on some materials for a project. She didn't question it, simply kissing me on the cheek and telling me to drive safe. Victor's office was a small, unassuming space tucked into a quiet corner of downtown. He was a tall man in his 50s, with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. As I laid out everything I knew, every detail, every suspicion, he listened intently, taking notes without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "There's definitely something going on," he said. "But don't jump to conclusions just yet. People are complicated, and things aren't always what they seem. My job is to find the truth, whatever that may be." I nodded, grateful for his level-headed approach. "How long do you think it will take?" "It depends," he said. "I'll start with basic surveillance. If she's meeting someone, we'll find out where and when. From there, we'll dig deeper." He assured me he would handle everything discreetly and promised to update me as soon as he had anything concrete. The drive home was quiet, the city lights blurring as I stared out at the road ahead. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own life. When I got home, Svetlana was already in bed, her breathing soft and steady. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, now felt like a mystery. As I lay down beside her, my mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Who was she meeting? And most importantly, why? Over the next few days, Victor kept me updated on his progress. He started by following Svetlana to and from work, noting her routine and any deviations from it. At first, everything seemed normal. She went to the office, ran errands, and came home without incident. But then, on the third day, Victor called with news. "She's meeting someone," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I followed her after work today. She drove to a cafe on the other side of town and met with a man. They sat in a corner booth and talked for over an hour." My stomach clenched. "Did you get any pictures?" "Yes," he said. "I'll send them over. But I should warn you, it doesn't look good." When the photos arrived, I opened them with trembling hands. There she was, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, and leaned in close as they spoke. Svetlana was smiling, her posture relaxed and open in a way that made my chest ache. Victor's notes accompanied the photos, detailing their body language and the way they seemed completely at ease with each other. I stared at the images for what felt like hours, the weight of them pressing down on me. This was no longer just suspicion. This was proof. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to know who he was, how long this had been going on, and just how deep the betrayal ran. Victor assured me he would find out. "Leave it to me," he said. "We'll get to the bottom of this." As I hung up the phone, I realized I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The next steps would change everything. But no matter how much it hurt, I had to keep going. The truth was out there, and I wouldn't stop until I uncovered it all. Days turned into a blur as I waited for Victor's updates. My work became mechanical, every task completed on autopilot, while my mind fixated on the unfolding drama. Each time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped, hoping it was Victor with answers, and dreading what those answers might be. Finally, the call came. "I've identified him," Victor said. "The man she met at the cafe. His name is Alex Koval. He's a local entrepreneur, runs a small marketing agency downtown." Alex Koval. A stranger, yet the name struck like a punch. The cufflinks flashed in my mind, engraved with AK. The connection was undeniable. "There's more," Victor continued, his voice careful. "This isn't the first time they've met. Over the past week, I've tracked them to 2 other locations. A hotel near the city center and another upscale restaurant. They're being discreet, but not enough to avoid notice." A hotel. The word echoed in my mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. "I have photos and timestamps," Victor added. "Would you like me to send them over?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The photos arrived minutes later. My breath caught as I opened them, one by one. There she was, Svetlana, my wife, smiling across a candlelit table, her hand resting lightly on Alex's. Another photo showed them walking into the hotel, their shoulders brushing as they leaned close to talk. Victor's notes detailed their meetings with cold precision. The dates, the times, the subtle exchanges of affection that left no room for misinterpretation. When I looked up from my phone, the house around me felt suffocating. Every room seemed tainted, every shared memory overshadowed by the images now seared into my brain. That evening, I sat across from Svetlana at the dinner table, my appetite long gone. She chatted about her day, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Her laugh, once a sound that brought me joy, now grated against my nerves. "Are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she noticed my silence. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "Work's been a lot lately." She nodded, accepting the excuse without question. But I could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or the fear of being caught. I spent the next few days in a haze, torn between anger and heartbreak. The evidence was undeniable, but I still couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal before making my move. Victor, sensing my hesitation, called with another update. "I've done a deeper dive into Alex's background," he said. "He's married, 2 kids, lives in a suburb about 20 minutes from here. His wife, Natalia, seems unaware of what's going on." The revelation stunned me. Alex wasn't just some bachelor looking for a fling. He was risking his family, just as Svetlana was risking ours. "What do you want to do with this information?" Victor asked. I didn't have an immediate answer. Part of me wanted to call Natalia, to lay everything out and let her deal with Alex. But another part of me hesitated, unsure if dragging another innocent person into this mess was the right thing to do. Instead, I asked Victor to keep digging. If there was more to uncover, I wanted to know. The following evening, Svetlana came home later than usual. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her blouse wrinkled in a way that didn't come from sitting at a desk. She breezed past me with a muttered excuse about traffic and disappeared into the bedroom. I waited a few minutes before following her. She was in the bathroom, the sound of running water masking her movements. I opened her closet and searched her purse, my hands trembling. Inside, I found another clue, a small keycard with the logo of the hotel Victor had mentioned. My stomach churned as I stared at it, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. When Svetlana emerged from the bathroom, she looked startled to see me standing there, the keycard in my hand. "What's this?" I asked, my voice calm but edged with steel. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "It's for work," she stammered. "We had a meeting there last week." "At a hotel?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," she said quickly. It was a client thing. Nothing unusual. Her explanation was smooth, but her body betrayed her. She fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, avoiding my gaze. I didn't push further, choosing instead to let the silence stretch. She shifted uncomfortably under my scrutiny, her earlier confidence crumbling. That night, as she slept, I sat in the living room, the keycard and Victor's photos spread out on the coffee table. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no denying what was happening. But now, I had a choice to make. Do I confront her? Do I expose her lies and demand the truth? Or do I continue to gather ammunition, ensuring that when I finally act, there's no room for her to twist the narrative? As the hours ticked by, I realized there was no turning back. The truth was out, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The days that followed were a test of my patience. I kept the facade of normalcy intact, but inside, I was unraveling. Every glance, every word exchanged with Svetlana felt like a charade. I knew the truth now, yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not until I was ready to lay everything bare. Victor continued to send updates, each one more damning than the last. He uncovered more meetings, more messages exchanged between Svetlana and Alex. Their relationship wasn't just a fleeting affair, it was calculated, deliberate. They even had a pattern, meeting on specific days when they knew their alibis would hold up. Then, one evening, the opportunity presented itself. Svetlana's phone buzzed on the coffee table while she was in the shower. The screen lit up, displaying a message from a number saved under the name. Annie. My chest tightened as I read the preview. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time? I picked up the phone, my hand trembling. The lock screen prevented me from opening the message fully, but it didn't matter. I had seen enough. This wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated. By the time Svetlana came out of the bathroom, I had made my decision. The game was over. She walked into the living room, her hair wrapped in a towel, and smiled at me as if nothing was wrong. I couldn't stomach it anymore. Who's Annie? I asked, my voice calm but firm. She froze for a split second, barely perceptible, but I caught it. What do you mean? She asked, feigning confusion. I saw the message, I said, holding up her phone. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time? What's that about? Her face paled, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then she laughed, a brittle, forced sound. Oh, that's just Annie being Annie. She's probably talking about our yoga class. I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch between us. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, I spoke, my voice colder than I intended. Do you take me for a fool? Her eyes darted to the side, her breathing quickening. Andrew, you're overreacting. It's nothing. It's not nothing. I snapped, my composure slipping. I know about Alex. I know about the meetings, the hotel, the lies. I have the proof, Svetlana. Stop insulting me by pretending this is all in my head. Her mouth opened and closed like she was grasping for words, but none came. The color drained from her face as she realized the extent of what I knew. She began, but I cut her off. Don't, I said, my voice sharp. Don't lie to me again. I want the truth, Svetlana. All of it. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, double down on her lies. But then, she sank onto the couch, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her secrets had finally crushed her. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. I never meant for it to go this far. How long? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. A few months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. It started as nothing. Just texts, harmless conversations. But then, she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Hearing her admit it didn't bring the closure I thought it would. Instead, it felt like a knife twisting deeper. "Why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Why him? Why this?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't know," she said. "I was lonely, Andrew. You're always at work, always tired. I felt invisible." Her words hit me like a hammer, but they didn't absolve her. "So instead of talking to me, you turned to someone else?" I said, my voice laced with bitterness. "You betrayed me, Svetlana. Do you even understand what you've done?" "I'm sorry," she said, the words sounding hollow. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You destroyed us, Svetlana." "You didn't just hurt me. You broke everything we built." The silence that followed was deafening. She sat there, tears streaming down her face, while I stood frozen, trying to process the weight of her betrayal. Finally, I turned and walked away, unable to bear the sight of her any longer. "I need some air," I said over my shoulder. "Don't follow me." I grabbed my keys and left the house, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with anger, sadness, and a growing sense of inevitability. This was it. There was no going back. Svetlana's confession had shattered any illusions I clung to. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer trust. When I finally returned home, the house was dark and silent. Svetlana was asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't care. I sat in the living room, staring at the empty walls, and made up my mind. The confrontation was over. Now, it was time for the reckoning. The days after the confrontation were surreal. Svetlana acted like a ghost, avoiding me as much as possible. The air in the house was heavy, every shared space tense with unspoken words. For my part, I kept things civil. I didn't shout or throw accusations anymore. The time for emotions had passed. Now, it was about action. The first thing I did was call Victor, she confessed. I told him, my voice calm but resolute. Now, I need to know everything. Every last detail. Victor didn't miss a beat. Understood. I'll gather the remaining threads and deliver a full report. This won't take long. True to his word, Victor provided me with a comprehensive dossier a few days later. It was all there. Photos, messages, locations. He'd even managed to dig up Alex's schedule, which conveniently overlapped with Svetlana's absences. But the real bombshell came in the form of Alex's wife, Natalia. Victor had spoken to her, carefully revealing just enough to gauge her reaction. Unsurprisingly, she had no idea her husband was living a double life. She's willing to talk to you, Victor said. She's as blindsided by this as you are. I hesitated. Reaching out to Natalia felt like crossing a line, but at the same time, it was impossible to ignore the opportunity. If anyone understood the betrayal I was feeling, it was her. After some deliberation, I agreed to meet her. We met at a small cafe on a quiet weekday afternoon. Natalia was a striking woman, her features sharp and expressive. She carried herself with a dignity that belied the heartbreak I could see in her eyes. Andrew, she said, extending a hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Thank you for coming, I replied, shaking her hand before we both sat down. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of our shared circumstances hanging heavy in the air. So, she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. What do we do now? I wasn't sure how to answer. I don't know, I admitted. I'm still trying to figure that out myself. We talked for hours, comparing notes and piecing together the timeline of their affair. Natalia's insights filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. She revealed how Alex had been taking more business trips lately and had grown distant at home. By the time we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of solidarity. We were two people caught in the same storm, trying to make sense of the wreckage left behind. Back at home, Svetlana was waiting for me. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes hollow and red. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Out," I said simply, brushing past her into the living room. She followed me, her desperation evident. "Andrew, please. I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this. We can move past it." I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. "Fix it? How exactly do you plan to fix this, Svetlana? Do you think an apology will erase what you've done?" She flinched at my tone, but didn't back down. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Just tell me what to do." Her plea might have moved me once, but now it felt empty. She wasn't trying to save our marriage. She was trying to save herself. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice cold. "It's not just about the affair. It's about the lies, the betrayal, the complete lack of respect. How do you come back from that?" She opened her mouth to respond but faltered, unable to find the words. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I continued, my tone flat. "I'm filing for divorce." Her eyes widened in shock. "Divorce? Andrew, no. Please, we can work this out. I'll go to therapy. I'll do anything. Just don't throw this away." I laughed bitterly. "Throw this away? You threw it away the moment you decided to betray me. I'm just making it official." For the first time, her composure cracked. She sank onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. But I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just an overwhelming sense of relief. That night, I slept in the guest room, my decision firm in my mind. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the house. The days after I left the house were filled with a strange mixture of grief and clarity. Staying at a modest hotel on the outskirts of town, I had time to think without Svetlana's presence clouding my judgment. The weight of her betrayal still lingered, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Victor's final report arrived 2 days later, a package of damning evidence that left no room for doubt. It included more photos, detailed timelines of Svetlana's meetings with Alex, and even financial records showing questionable expenses from our joint account. It was more than enough for the divorce proceedings I had already set in motion. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elaine, was impressed with the thoroughness of my case. "This is solid," she said, flipping through the documents. "With this, you walk away clean. No spousal support, no unnecessary entanglements. And if she fights, we'll bury her." I nodded, the weight of her words both comforting and sobering. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. Meanwhile, Svetlana made repeated attempts to contact me. She called, texted, even left voicemails filled with tearful pleas for forgiveness. Each one was harder to listen to than the last, but I forced myself to endure them. I needed the reminder of why I was doing this. Then, one evening, I received an unexpected message, not from Svetlana, but from Natalia. "Can we talk? There's something you should know." Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to meet her at the same cafe as before. When I arrived, she was already there, her expression grim. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting across from her. Natalia hesitated, then slid a piece of paper across the table. It was an email printout, a conversation between Alex and Svetlana. As I scanned the words, my blood ran cold. They weren't just talking about their affair. They were plotting how to manipulate the divorce proceedings in their favor. Svetlana had suggested inflating her financial needs to secure a larger settlement, while Alex had offered advice on how to appear more sympathetic in court. "They're working together," Natalia said, her voice trembling with anger. "He's helping her try to take everything from you." My hands clenched around the paper. The betrayal cut even deeper than I'd thought. It wasn't enough for Svetlana to destroy our marriage. She was trying to destroy me. "Thank you for showing me this," I said, my voice tight. Natalia nodded, her expression softening. "We're in this together, Andrew. If you need anything, just let me know." I left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose. If Svetlana thought she could outmaneuver me, she was sorely mistaken. The next day, I met with Elaine and handed over the email. "This changes everything," she said, her eyes lighting up with determination. "Not only can we use this to discredit her, but we can also go after Alex for interfering in the divorce. This is gold." We spent the next week refining our strategy, preparing for what was sure to be a contentious court battle. Svetlana, unaware of what I now knew, continued to send messages, alternating between apologies and veiled threats. One voicemail stood out. "If you think you can just walk away without consequences, you're wrong," she said, her tone cold. "I won't let you ruin my life." I laughed bitterly when I heard it. Ruin her life? She'd done that all on her own. The day of reckoning. The court date arrived faster than I expected. Svetlana sat across the room, her expression a mixture of defiance and desperation. Alex wasn't there. Elaine had made sure his involvement was noted in our filings, which seemed to have scared him off. Elaine presented our case with ruthless efficiency, laying out the evidence in a way that left no room for argument. The photos, the financial records, the email, each piece was a nail in the coffin of Svetlana's defense. When it was her turn to speak, she tried to paint herself as a victim, claiming she had made mistakes out of loneliness and fear. But Elaine countered every point with cold, hard facts. By the time it was over, Svetlana's facade had crumbled. The judge ruled decisively in my favor. The house, the savings, and even the car remained mine. Svetlana was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. As we left the courtroom, she tried one last time to appeal to me. "Andrew," she said, her voice breaking, "please, can't we at least talk?" I turned to face her, my expression calm but firm. "We're done, Svetlana. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." Her tears meant nothing to me anymore. I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. The weeks after the court ruling were a whirlwind of change. For the first time in years, I found myself alone, not just physically, but emotionally. The house felt emptier without Svetlana's presence, but that emptiness came with an unexpected gift, peace. I took time to reflect, to untangle the threads of my life and rediscover who I was outside of our marriage. The man who had once been consumed by work and responsibility was now free to rebuild on his own terms. I started small, focusing on the basics. I cleared out the house, ridding it of anything that carried her lingering presence. Clothes, photos, even the perfume bottle she'd left on the dresser, I boxed it all up and donated it, determined to cleanse the space. Victor, ever the professional, sent me one last message. "If you need anything else, don't hesitate to call. You handled this with more grace than most people would." I thanked him and promised to leave a glowing review. One afternoon, as I was organizing some old belongings, I came across a photo of Svetlana and me from our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so full of promise. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, a fleeting grief for what could have been. But then, I set the photo down and walked away. Some wounds take time to heal, but that doesn't mean you stop moving forward. A new chapter. I threw myself into work, but not in the same way I had before. It wasn't about escaping my personal life anymore. It was about building something meaningful. I took on new projects, made connections with my team, and even started mentoring younger workers. In the evenings, I allowed myself to explore hobbies I had long neglected. Cooking, reading, even the occasional hike in the nearby woods, each activity felt like a small step toward reclaiming my sense of self. Natalia and I stayed in touch. She and Alex were going through their own divorce, and though her pain mirrored mine, she carried herself with quiet strength. We met for coffee a few times, sharing stories and supporting each other through the chaos. "I envy your calm," she said one day, stirring her latte. I smiled faintly. "It's not calm. It's just exhaustion." She laughed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed too. Closure. Months later, I stood outside the house for the last time. I had decided to sell it. Too many memories, too much baggage. The new owners, a young couple expecting their first child, had already started moving in. As I handed over the keys, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, relief, hope. "This house has a lot of potential," I said, smiling at them. The husband grinned. "So do we." Driving away, I felt lighter. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. A letter. One day, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Svetlana. I debated whether to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Andrew, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to say this. I'm sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you find happiness again. You deserve that much. Svetlana." I stared at the letter for a long time before folding it neatly and tucking it into a drawer. Her apology couldn't erase what had happened, but it was a step, too late for reconciliation, but not for closure. The future. Life didn't become perfect overnight, but it started to feel normal again. The scars from the betrayal remained, but they no longer defined me. Each day was a new opportunity to move forward, to embrace the life I wanted for myself. As I sat on the balcony of my new apartment one evening, watching the sunset, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Svetlana's betrayal had broken me, but it had also forced me to rebuild. And for that, in a strange way, I was grateful. The past was behind me. The future was mine. The end.